Mr. Braddock, the calculus teacher at Eisenberg High in Elkhart, Indiana, made a light-hearted gesture, singling out the janitor for amusement in front of the class. However, when the man calmly approached the board and solved the problem with unexpected skill, the room fell silent, fundamentally altering the school's perception of him. This occurred during fourth period on a Thursday, a typical day at Eisenberg High where students often watch the clock more than the lesson. Mr. Braddock had a certain reputation. Known for his sharp wit, impatience, and sarcastic remarks, he was a figure who evoked tolerance rather than affection. The classroom felt stale. Equations covered the whiteboard. A subtle scent of eraser dust and old sneakers permeated the air. Phones lay hidden beneath desks. A few students feigned attention, while others gazed out the window. Then, an event occurred, altering the classroom's atmosphere dramatically. While Mr. Braddock wrote another derivative on the board, a quiet squeak drifted in from the hallway. The janitor was close by, mopping just outside the classroom with his characteristic slow, steady pace. Braddock stopped speaking, looked toward the door, and gave a slight smile. Suddenly, he turned to the class and indicated the hallway. "Look who's here," he said. "Tell me, do you think you can solve this one?" He struck the board with his marker, mimicking a game show challenge. A ripple of laughter followed, not loud, but the type that makes you subtly adjust your posture, unsure of its appropriateness. Mr. Braddock smiled knowingly. "Come on, Lamar." Lamar Dorsey, a 52-year-old janitor, stood in the hallway, holding his mop. The familiar blue uniform, clean but faded, was on him, displaying L. Dorsey embroidered above his chest pocket. He remained still, showing no reaction. His gaze swept across the room. Then, deliberately, he entered. A mop rested against the wall. Several students straightened. Some anticipated a clever remark or a sudden departure. Perhaps a jest or simply a walkout. However, that didn't happen. Instead, Lamar proceeded to the front of the room. "You mind?" he inquired quietly, indicating the board with a gesture. Braddock raised his brows. "Be my guest." Several phones silently emerged from backpacks. One girl whispered, "Is he serious?" But nobody interrupted Lamar. He picked up the marker, examined the equation, and paused, not because he was unsure, but as if he were considering something. Intensely, like someone studying a well-known map. He narrowed his eyes slightly. Then he began to write. There was no theatrics, no embellishment, just careful strokes, one line following another. The room became unnervingly quiet. The only sounds were the marker on the whiteboard and a chair creaking as someone leaned forward. Mr. Braddock crossed his arms, observing intently. His expression remained unchanged, though his jaw tightened. Lamar explained the steps aloud, his voice quiet and patient. "See, this here's a chain rule problem, but the trick is recognizing the inner function first. Once you isolate that, it becomes a lot cleaner." He moved with the ease of someone experienced, not just with the problem, but with the teaching. His manner was unassuming and not arrogant. He clarified matters straightforwardly, with clarity, as if he's dedicated more effort to instruction than to menial tasks. Upon completion, he secured the marker and retreated. The board displayed meticulous, well-structured work. He addressed Braddock, then the class. "That's one approach," he stated, and briefly, stillness reigned. A junior student in the rear murmured. He understood it correctly. Mr. Braddock remained silent. Not instantly. His mouth parted a little, but no words emerged. The silence became more pronounced than any joke he could have delivered. Lamar nodded politely and retreated to the door. He gathered his mop. There was no applause, no self-promotion, only that quiet assurance, as if he hadn't just dramatically altered the room. But as Lamar reached for the chalk, no one anticipated what would follow. No one stirred. For a complete 10 seconds, it felt as though the class had been pulled from a dream and placed into something authentic. The sort of moment that doesn't typically occur in a high school classroom. Lamar Dorsey, known as Mr. Dorsey, was in the process of leaving when a comment was made. Had he just thought that? It was Wes Hanley, a senior seated in the front row, who rarely spoke unless it concerned academic performance. He was completely serious. His eyes were wide with surprise. He glanced back at the board, as if a solution might have altered during a brief moment of closure. Braddock then spoke, his tone even and somewhat annoyed. He acknowledged that Mr. Dorsey had, nonetheless, provided the correct answer. His voice lacked its typical sarcasm. A different feeling seemed present, perhaps confusion, or even something like discomfort. Lamar looked back. "I worked with numbers extensively in the past," he stated, then offered a slight shrug. "They remain with me." Several students chuckled, not directed at him this time, but because the atmosphere was easing. Lamar didn't pause for a reply. He departed, mop in hand, his shoes squeaking quietly down the hallway, as if nothing had occurred. It was as if he hadn't just resolved a complex academic challenge in less than 3 minutes without using a calculator. That's when the phones appeared. Someone had recorded the entire incident. Carly Benson, a junior in the third row, had already begun editing the video before the school bell sounded. In the hallway between classes, the topic of conversation was solely focused on the event. "Did you see Mr. Dorsey?" Braddock's expression. He appeared as if someone had disconnected him. Where did he acquire that knowledge? It was believed he only cleaned floors. By lunchtime, the video appeared on TikTok and then Instagram. It was unedited, simply a shaky view of Lamar's hands working on the board, accompanied by a voice saying, "Yo, he's solving it." The text accompanying the video stated, "Our janitor just outperformed the calculus teacher." Some people found it amusing. Others observed it with disbelief. Nevertheless, the excitement continued to build. In the teacher's lounge, the atmosphere was similarly charged. "Are you suggesting he completed a full derivative chain problem mentally?" inquired Ms. Lin, the physics teacher. She had paused mid-bite of her sandwich, "And so did he," muttered Mr. Crane, the English teacher. "Didn't use notes. Didn't even pause." It was like muscle memory. Braddock was at the corner table, seemingly grading papers. He remained silent. However, Principal Everett spoke. He had been at the school for 6 years. It was surprising that no one knew he had an academic background. People shook their heads. Few people really knew much about Lamar. He arrived early. He left late. The floors were always clean. Light bulbs rarely failed within a day. The man worked in silence. However, he was no longer simply the man behind the mop. Down the hallway, a group of students waited near the janitor's closet. They weren't there to report a spill or request a broom. They simply wanted to speak with him. One student, a 12-year-old boy holding his geometry book, inquired, "Do you tutor Mr. Dorsey?" Lamar blinked. "I haven't in a long time," he replied. "You should," the boy suggested. That was a kind thing to say. Lamar chuckled, but it wasn't unkind. "I'm simply astonished." During the third period the following day, Braddock's demeanor had changed. He refrained from making jokes. He didn't call on students arbitrarily. He spoke with his gaze directed at the board, his voice more subdued than normal. It wasn't voiced directly, but it was obvious to all. Following the class, Wes approached him. "Mr. Braddock, regarding that incident with Mr. Dorsey yesterday, he employed the very method you demonstrated last week. The chain rule, correct?" Braddock nodded once. "That is correct. Only he articulated it more effectively." Braddock remained silent. However, the truly startling aspect wasn't the proposed solution itself. It was what Lamar said following it. Lamar Dorsey hadn't intended to create a disturbance. He generally avoided being the focus of attention. This had been the case since his youth. Consequently, when students began congregating near the maintenance closet simply to converse, or when teachers directed extended glances his way in the hallways, he felt uneasy. He lowered his gaze and continued with his regular activities. Restocking paper towels, repairing a leaky faucet in the boys' locker room, and cleaning cafeteria tables consumed his time. However, he began to notice a subtle change. There was a perceptible shift in how people regarded him, as if they were attempting to place him within a framework they hadn't previously recognized. This wasn't merely curiosity, it was a mixture of confusion, respect, and perhaps regret. The sensation made him uncomfortable. Later that afternoon, Principal Everett requested that he visit the front office. He entered, still wearing his gloves, his uniform slightly damp from cleaning the cafeteria sinks. He took off his cap as a gesture of respect. Everett leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped together. Lamar, may I ask you a question? Do you have experience in education or engineering? Lamar paused. He glanced downwards briefly, as if revisiting a long-forgotten aspect of himself. I attended Purdue, he said softly. Mechanical engineering. Full scholarship. The principal leaned back, eyebrows raised. You serious? Was Lamar's reply. He had plans. Things got complicated, and for the first time in a long while, he began to recount the story. He'd grown up in Gary, Indiana. A bright young man, he's always been fascinated by how things worked. Motors, pulleys, anything he could take apart and put back together. His mother, Estelle, raised him and his two sisters on her own. She worked overtime at a textile plant and still found time to read to them every night. She held a deep conviction that education offered the sole path to advancement, frequently stating, books first, always. She explained that the world might attempt to deny opportunity, but possessing your own key ensured access. Lamar secured that key. He was valedictorian, a winner at the state science fair, and then received a scholarship to Purdue. During his freshman year, he was already tutoring fellow students. Instructors noticed his name on the attendance roster and took note. However, sophomore year brought a life-altering phone call. His mother had collapsed at work. Medical professionals diagnosed her with advanced cancer. When Lamar arrived at the hospital, she was struggling to remain conscious. I can handle this, she murmured. He disregarded her request and did not return home. He took a semester off from school, then another. He found employment, working in a warehouse and doing overnight shifts at a grocery store. He worked to cover expenses. Academic pursuits became less important. So did the dream. When his mother died, possessions were disorganized. He lacked a place to return to, lacked funds to complete his degree, and received no communication from a guidance counselor checking on his absence. I repeatedly thought I would return to school, Lamar told Everett. But one situation led to another. Life doesn't wait for anyone. The principal remained silent. The narrative carried weight, not melodrama. It was simply authentic, the sort of existence one rarely encounters unless actively inquired about. At his residence, Lamar stored his academic records in a box situated beneath his bed. He possessed a faded Purdue sweatshirt, an antique calculator, and a photograph of himself and his mother from orientation day. He had not used any of these items, yet he kept them. Now they were being revisited. That evening, he was seated on the rear steps of his modest apartment complex. The sky was dusky, with a stillness punctuated only by the distant murmur of vehicles. He drank tea from a metal thermos and gazed into the distance. It had been years since he's considered calculus. It had been a while since his last tutoring job, before he left school, and now it reappeared, like a familiar face at his door. But a single choice threatened to undo all his efforts. While in college, Lamar had vowed to take a brief respite, stabilize his family situation, and then complete his education successfully. However, life rarely follows plans, particularly those founded on hope. Following his mother's passing, Lamar went back to Gary, attempting to rebuild. His sisters were still in high school, struggling to manage. Bills accumulated on the counter. The landlord demanded rent, and no one from Purdue contacted him to inquire about his disappearance. He accepted any available work. He worked as a stockroom loader, a janitor at a strip mall, and provided overnight security at a shipping yard. Anything that provided sufficient income to pay the electricity bill. His education receded further and further from his immediate concerns. Initially, he would occasionally contact the university to inquire about reapplying and transferring credits. Forms were sent to him. He completed them. However, he didn't mail them. There was always an obstacle. Then came a critical moment. It occurred in late November. A man named Frank Booker, the owner of a flooring company in South Bend, had offered Lamar consistent employment. "You're capable," he stated. "Don't squander your time sweeping floors. I'll personally train you." Lamar felt hopeful again, having a genuine opportunity. However, the day before his start date, his youngest sister, Alana, was involved in a school altercation. a disagreement that quickly worsened. She had injured someone's nose. Expulsion was threatened. Lamar felt compelled to be present. No one else would support her. Consequently, he missed his first day at the flooring job. Frank reassigned the position to another person. And that was the end of it. An opportunity was lost. He relinquished his pursuit of dreams and instead prioritized stability. Years passed indistinctly. He moved from town to town, holding various jobs. He maintained a clean record and avoided legal issues, simply focusing on survival. Quietly, when he reached Elkhart in his early 40s, he wasn't seeking a fresh start. He simply wanted a reliable income. The school district provided benefits. Summers were peaceful. He accepted the janitor position without hesitation. He found it agreeable in his own way. It was predictable. The work was clean. Students left him undisturbed. Teachers offered polite smiles. He didn't anticipate friendship or belonging. He didn't require it. He remained inconspicuous. He cleaned up messes and vanished before the last bell rang. Yet, numbers remained with him. Occasionally, after successfully completing a math course, he would briefly observe the board. He'd see a formula and mentally solve it. It felt akin to muscle memory, a facet of his mind that remained keen even as other aspects succumbed to the weight of habit. He would return home, prepare a simple supper, grilled fish, brown rice, perhaps some carrots, and peruse a vintage engineering book he stored behind the cereal boxes, just to confirm his abilities. He invariably did. He simply lacked an opportunity to demonstrate them. Then Mr. Braddock addressed him that day. And now, changes were occurring, not only at school, but also within him. He reflected on the students who waited outside his supply closet with questions. He thought about Wes Hamley visiting that morning with a folded piece of paper and saying, "Mr. Dorsey, I attempted to solve that same problem. Could you review it for me?" And Lamar had, with care, methodically. He clarified where Wes had made a mistake without causing embarrassment. Wes smiled when he finally grasped the concept. It wasn't solely a matter of pride. It was about a sense of belonging. That feeling lingered. However, not everyone reacted positively. Braddock, in particular, became unusually reserved. Students observed it. Teachers observed it. The experience of being surpassed by someone he hadn't previously considered a significant figure in front of his class clearly affected him. He didn't respond aggressively. Instead, his responses became more abrupt, his tolerance diminished. Any mention of Lamar in the lounge was swiftly redirected. He was not accustomed to being overshadowed, especially not by someone who had been unknown to him until now. But life held one more surprise, and this one brought him back to mathematics. The video didn't remain within Eisenberg High. It spread beyond. It began with a local student page reposting it, accompanied by the caption, "When your janitor turns out to be smarter than your teacher." Then it appeared on a regional education forum. By the weekend, it had spread across state lines. People online were astonished. They weren't mocking Lamar, they were impressed. He explained it with greater clarity than my college professor. Someone should give this man a classroom and a chalkboard, not a mop. It's a reminder that you never know someone's story. By Monday morning, Lamar had no idea any of this was occurring. He didn't use social media. He still had a flip phone. When he arrived at work, the first thing he did was repair a jammed paper towel dispenser in the girls' bathroom, just like he always did on Mondays. But something felt different. Conversations stopped as he passed. Students nodded, not out of duty, but with an unusual sense of respect. Some even smiled, as if meeting him for the first time. "Hey, Mr. Dorsey," a girl called out as he neared the library. "You're kind of famous now." Lamar chuckled quietly. However, when he rounded the corner, Wes Hamley was there, accompanied by two other students. One held a calculus book. A problem was indicated, marked in pink. "Would you mind going through this with us?" Wes asked. Lamar looked around, seemingly confused. "You got a free period?" Someone inquired. We made time. And so, in the hallway, surrounded by lockers and science fair posters, Lamar sat down on the floor with three teenagers and guided them through a multivariable equation. Step by step, line by line. He didn't lecture them. He engaged with them. It wasn't boisterous or extravagant, but a significant moment unfolded. Further down the hallway, someone recorded the incident. Lamar wasn't informed. He likely would have disapproved. Returning to the office, Principal Everett was speaking with a member of the local school board. Affirming the information, she stated, Lamar Dorsey. He's been with us for 6 years. No, he's not faculty, he's a custodian. She hesitated, then responded, well, I wouldn't describe it as unorthodox. I'd say it was overlooked. Simultaneously, in the teacher's lounge, Braddock was reviewing an email shared by a parent containing a link to the now viral video. He closed the laptop without watching it. That afternoon, Everett called Lamar back in, offered him a seat. Lamar stayed standing. I've got a request from the board, the principal said. They want to know if you'd be interested in running an after-school tutoring program. Small group, voluntary, just a trial run. Lamar didn't answer right away. You'd be paid, of course, Everett added. This isn't about changing your existing responsibilities, but rather expanding them. Reflecting on the skills he still possesses, Lamar glanced at his hands. They were calloused, clean, and worn. I haven't taught in a long time, he stated. You haven't ceased to know, Everett responded. Lamar raised his gaze. There was no strain evident in the man's tone, only a straightforward suggestion. I will consider it, he said. That evening, he retrieved the aged cardboard box from beneath his bed. It contained the Purdue sweatshirt, the transcripts, and the orientation photo. He hadn't touched it in years. He spread everything out on the table. The paper had yellowed slightly. The edges were curled, but the words remained. That was the nature of knowledge. It didn't fade. It simply waited. He didn't need to become popular online. He didn't care about the views or the comments. But knowing he could still make a difference resonated with him. However, while some were impressed, others were not pleased by his growing recognition. As Lamar gained more recognition, the school environment started to change. This transformation initially manifested in the student body. Those who previously ignored him in the hallways began to greet him. Some even sought his assistance with homework during class breaks. Within 2 weeks, a small group of students had informally established what they termed Dorsey sessions. After school, they would gather in the library, notebooks ready, concentrating as Lamar elucidated ideas with a surprising clarity that everyone acknowledged. Soon, teachers noticed. Ms. Lynn, the physics teacher, was the first to visit the library and observe him assisting the students. You possess a talent, she remarked gently, and it's not limited to calculations. However, not all reactions were positive. Mr. Braddock had remained silent regarding Lamar since the initial event. Within the teacher's lounge, he presented an outward appearance of normalcy. However, his silences betrayed a lingering bitterness. His speech was concise and abrupt. He avoided direct eye contact with Lamar and never referenced calculus. During a parent-teacher meeting, when Lamar's increasing impact on the students was discussed, Braddock stated, "It's good they're interested in math. Let's just make sure we don't blur the line between instruction and inspiration." While seemingly courteous, the underlying tone was unmistakable to everyone present. The principal didn't ignore the situation. He summoned Braddock to his office one morning and explained the issue directly. "I know it was difficult," Everett remarked, "but Lamar didn't shame you. He motivated them," Braddock conceded, adjusting in his chair. "He may lack formal credentials, but he's educated significantly more than we initially understood. And crucially, he's connecting with students in a manner that we haven't been able to." Braddock started to speak, then stopped. There was little to add. Lamar continued with his established schedule. He didn't request an official position. He didn't desire any preferential consideration. However, when Principal Harding suggested a small payment to continue the tutoring sessions, he agreed. The motivation wasn't financial, it simply felt appropriate. Consequently, he began carrying a small binder. Within it were pages of problems, blank worksheets, and notes he'd written by hand. During breaks, he'd sit in the back corner of the cafeteria and jot down formulas from memory, sometimes acknowledging a student who'd call out, "Hey, Mr. D." One afternoon, Carly, the student who filmed the original clip, approached him near the vending machines. "Did you ever want to be a teacher?" she asked. Lamar paused before replying. "I want to build things. Teach later, maybe, but life had different ideas." Carly responded, handing him a new mechanical pencil. "I think you're doing both now." He smiled. Thank you. However, beneath this pleasantness, there was underlying tension. Some parents had begun contacting the school. While the response was largely positive, a single, anonymous concern reached the board. The question raised was whether it was appropriate for a janitor to tutor students within the school. Concerns were also voiced regarding his certification and background checks for instruction. Everett addressed the matter promptly. He is a district employee and has not acted inappropriately. It was suggested that if genuine concern was the driver, a direct conversation with me would have occurred. He did not inform Lamar about the complaint. Nevertheless, Lamar sensed a subtle tension present. Some individuals seemed unsure how to perceive him now that he no longer blended into the periphery. Then, one afternoon, Braddock took an unexpected action. He entered the library during one of Lamar's tutoring sessions. He observed silently from a distance as Lamar explained integrals to a group of 4 students. After roughly 10 minutes, he approached. "Do you mind if I sit in?" Braddock inquired. Lamar looked up. His expression remained unchanged. He gestured toward a chair. The students laughed, just enough to lighten the moment. Braddock smirked. For once, it wasn't mean. They sat together that day, saying little, but it was a start. Lamar Dorsey wasn't interested in titles. He had something else in mind. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. For Lamar Dorsey, standing at the whiteboard in the library with students gathered around, it was never about redemption or revenge. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He didn't seek recognition. He simply showed up for them, the kids, the ones who reminded him of the boy he once was. Every Tuesday and Thursday, right after the final bell, that corner of the library filled with chatter, questions, scribbled notes, and wide eyes as Lamar walked students through math problems they once feared. Not because he possessed all the answers, but because he helped them believe they could discover those answers themselves. That's what mattered. Isaiah, a freshman who previously struggled with algebra last semester, is now confidently solving quadratic equations. Tasha, who once disliked math, is now conducting brief study groups on weekends for her cousins, utilizing notes from Lamar. Lamar didn't lecture from the front of the room like a conventional teacher. Instead, he sat alongside his students, engaged in conversation, and posed questions before providing answers. Consequently, an increasing number of teachers began visiting. They weren't there to monitor, but simply to observe his methods. Ms. Lynn inquired about utilizing some of his explanations in her class. Coach Rivera asked if Lamar would assist in establishing a summer preparation group for incoming freshmen. Even Braddock, typically hesitant and prideful, began visiting frequently. While not every day, he visited often enough. He would quietly suggest a couple of additional problems and eventually started offering words of encouragement to the students. The sharpness in his voice lessened. A change occurred within him, softening his demeanor. During one tutoring session, Braddock stayed behind after the students had departed. "You know," he remarked, glancing at the board, "I once believed this position conferred significance upon me. That teaching provided authority." Lamar remained silent. "But you're showing me what it truly involves, consistently being present and ensuring that each moment has value." Lamar simply nodded in agreement. Everyone occasionally strays from their path. He was not one to bear resentment. He had no need to. Principal Everett summoned him again a month later. A suggestion was put forward to establish his sessions as a non-credit elective class next semester, designed for enrichment and to build students' confidence. Everett cautioned that we would need to navigate some administrative processes. Lamar responded, shaking his head gently, and stated that he appreciated the offer but did not require the formal recognition. He preferred to maintain a simple approach, encouraging attendance based on genuine interest rather than a fixed schedule. Everett agreed, nodding, and assured him that they would provide support in any way possible. News of his efforts extended past the school district. A reporter from a local news outlet visited to conduct an interview. Lamar chose to keep his comments brief, avoiding sensationalism and self-promotion. "I'm simply demonstrating what they already possess," he stated. "Sometimes it requires a bit of time to recognize it." In the spring, Eisenberg High held its yearly student showcase, featuring science projects, art displays, and choir performances. In one corner of the gym, A booth called Dorsey's Table showcased student reflections on math, life, and confidence. Many students wrote about how Lamar had helped them discover more about themselves. This wasn't because he provided answers, but because he listened and showed belief. By the end of the night, people had stopped asking, "Is he the janitor?" Instead, they were saying, "That's Mr. Dorsey." He didn't wear a suit. He didn't give a speech. He stood near the table, smiled, and expressed gratitude to the students who approached. Afterwards that evening, returning to his apartment, he retrieved the well-worn Purdue sweatshirt from the box beneath his bed. He refrained from wearing it. Instead, he folded it carefully, placed it inside a fresh storage container, and added a file containing student thank-you notes alongside it. He understood that legacy isn't defined by positions. It's about the impact you create in others. He didn't require completing school to instruct. He didn't need a degree to guide. He simply needed to be present each day and demonstrate genuine care. And that's precisely what he intended to continue. Thank you for hearing Lamar's story. If it resonated with you, if it brought to mind someone you may have underestimated or someone who offered you support, please subscribe and share it with someone who could benefit from it. Because sometimes the most brilliant intellects reside in the most unassuming environments. Two men believed it was amusing to embarrass a mother in front of her children, until a mechanic, wearing a grease-stained shirt, quietly stopped them in front of everyone in the store. Roderick Blaine, 42, hadn't intended to be a hero that evening. He had just completed a long shift at the mechanic shop off Greenwell Springs Road in Baton Rouge. His work shirt still had a faint odor of oil and sweat, and his back felt sore in that familiar, persistent way it did when the weather suggested rain. He intended to quickly purchase a few items: milk, eggs, perhaps some smoked sausage, and return home before his niece completed her homework. She had been staying with him for several weeks while her mom worked the late shift at the hospital. They had established a regular pattern: dinner, cartoons, spelling drills. He didn't even use a cart, opting for a handheld basket and a mental list. The store experienced a lack of congestion, yet a palpable sense of unease hung in the air. Shoppers with weary expressions, children complaining, a hurried individual quickly maneuvering past, someone proceeding at a leisurely pace. It was the sort of atmosphere where direct glances were avoided, and all desired a swift entry and exit. Roderick was in the process of his internal review and moving towards the frozen foods area. That's when he detected it, a voice distinct, piercing, rising above the subdued sounds of checkout scanners and squeaking cartwheels. A different voice then, laced with laughter. It wasn't a pleasant sound, the type that prompted a tightening of the jaw before understanding its cause. He turned, his attention drawn to the disturbance. Two men were positioned close to the freezer doors. They appeared to be about his age, perhaps slightly younger. Both wore baseball caps. One had a Bluetooth earpiece, and the other displayed a tattoo extending up his neck. Their posture seemed relaxed, but their voices did not match. They weren't shouting, but they were acting. A young woman, likely in her early 30s, stood nearby. She was wearing a faded hoodie and attempting to manage two children, a toddler in the cart and a boy around 7 years old holding on. Her daughter was upset. Her son looked down at the floor. The woman held her SNAP card tightly. Roderick initially struggled to understand every word the men spoke, but their tone conveyed their message. They said she should have waited for a man before having so many children. He thought she likely had a different partner for each child. The man with the earpiece quietly laughed, shaking his head as if the woman were a joke. Roderick halted. He stood there, 2 feet from the frozen peas, one hand still holding his basket. He observed the woman's shoulders become rigid, her jaw tighten. However, she didn't acknowledge them. She focused on her daughter, gently moving the cart back and forth as if it were a cradle. Silence filled the space. No one intervened. He looked around the aisle. The sound registered. A teenage cashier briefly looked up. An older woman close to the produce section stood motionless, feigning interest in a label. The moment lingered, as if everyone hoped it would simply disappear. It did not. Roderick advanced. He didn't move towards the woman, nor towards the man. Just forward. His heart began its familiar, heavy rhythm, the one that accompanies the confusion of anger and shame. He recognized this feeling. It wasn't precisely the moment, but it felt similar. Different people, a different location. Still, the core message remained. He observed as the young man gently pulled at his father's coat. "Father, may we simply leave?" He crouched down, murmured something into his ear. His voice was quiet, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached into his wallet. Silas paused. He wasn't one for conflict. Not since 1998. But something about that young man's tone. Something about the way he inquired, "Can we just go?" As if the disgrace was theirs, not the adult men. It evoked a feeling within. And suddenly, Roderick forgot about the milk and eggs. However, before he could speak, the man with the earpiece added something. A statement that halted Roderick again, this time for a completely different cause. The man with the earpiece remarked, audible to several shoppers in the aisle, that if she allocated less time to accessing food stamps and more to employment, perhaps she wouldn't require assistance. The delivery of his statement was significant. He spoke loudly, seemingly intending for the entire store to overhear. The impression was that he aimed to publicly shame her. Roderick's hand tightened around the basket, his knuckles turning pale. He remained positioned back, partially obscured by the end cap displaying canned soups. From his vantage point, he observed the woman's profile. Her cheekbones were prominent, her mouth set in a firm line. She refused to offer them the gratification of a reaction, yet her tension was palpable. Her son held her waist tightly, as if securing her position. The other man, identified by the neck tattoo, bumped his companion and scoffed, "Don't waste your breath. She's probably just going to sell that food to buy a new wig." Roderick blinked. He paused, thinking he might have misunderstood. But no, that was what he had said. Still, no one reacted. The teenage cashier averted her gaze. The woman examining the fruit labels now intently checked her phone. A young man pushing a cart filled with Gatorade steered clear of them, as if avoiding something he couldn't see. It felt as though everyone was attempting to vanish. The mother tried to remain composed. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she succumb to despair. She deliberately gave her card to the cashier, her gaze fixed on the small display as if her well-being hinged on it. The toddler had become still, aware of the strained atmosphere. Roderick released a deep breath through his nose. He was observing a woman being openly humiliated for needing assistance. A woman who, judging by her appearance, seemed to be simply attempting to manage the day with her children fed and her self-respect preserved. Two adult men, appearing as though they'd avoided regular employment for some time, seemed intent on shaming her. The situation felt disturbingly recognizable. He recalled a childhood memory of standing in line with his mother around the age of 8 or 9 at a grocery store off Plank Road. He remembered the burning embarrassment of the stairs back then, the way people looked when his mom presented food stamps. She never discussed it openly. She simply told him, "Keep your head up and hold the bag, baby." The memory triggered something within him. He moved nearer, now fully visible. "Hey," he called out, the word carrying enough volume to draw the attention of both men. The individual with the earpiece lifted an eyebrow. The other offered a smirk. Roderick maintained a composed tone. "Evenly, you consistently address women in that manner, or is it only when you presume no one will object?" The men paused, appearing uncertain whether he intended it as a jest. The man bearing the tattoo chuckled faintly. "What, your boyfriend, or something?" Roderick shook his head. "Nah, I'm just a man who understands the difference between a joke and bullying." That seemed to surprise them. The man with the earpiece struggled to speak. Roderick moved forward. He didn't act aggressively or threaten anyone, but he positioned himself close enough to no longer be a background voice. Close enough that people in the aisle were now paying attention. "You notice a woman with her kids. She isn't causing any trouble. She was simply attempting to purchase groceries. And you decided today was the opportune moment to display how insignificant you are?" The neck tattoo guy rolled his eyes. "Man, mind your own business." Roderick didn't blink. "This is my business. Anytime I see a grown man harass a mother in front of her children as if it were entertainment, yeah, That's my business. A silence descended. Not the kind that signifies resolution. The kind that suggests a change has occurred. The woman remained standing at the register. Her hands paused, as if uncertain whether to continue packing her bag or observe the situation. Her son looked up at Roderick, his eyes wide with confusion. Before either man could react, the manager arrived, and his initial words would drastically alter the room's atmosphere. The store manager's voice pierced the tension, crisp and concise, though somewhat delayed. "Is there a problem over here?" he inquired. He was a short man in his 50s. Heavy-framed glasses, a khaki shirt tucked into worn jeans. A name tag identified him as Vince Callahan, and his darting eyes revealed he's been observing from afar, intervening only as the volume increased. Roderick remained silent initially, wanting to ascertain the recipient of the question. The two men straightened slightly, seemingly realizing they may have overstepped. "It's nothing," the person with the tattoo stated, raising their hands in a gesture of innocence. "We were simply having a conversation," the other person added hastily. "No one made contact with her or anything." Roderick looked toward Vince, who returned his gaze, seemingly unsure of his position in the situation. "Talking?" Roderick inquired, his voice calm. "Is that what you consider talking?" Vince paused. "Look, I just want to avoid any problems in the store. Customers are trying to make purchases." Roderick inhaled deeply. "Were you prepared to allow these two men to harass a woman in front of her children rather than address the issue?" Vince reacted visibly to the statement. A silence fell, and everyone remained still. The mother continued to stand quietly, her hands now carefully arranging items into a single reusable grocery bag. She showed no tears. However, her expression held a detached quality, a type of emotional barrier people develop when they've learned to mask pain for an extended period. Roderick looked at her, then back at Vince. "This isn't about comfort, man. It's about right and wrong." The words weren't loud, but they carried. A woman a few feet away who had been picking out yogurt suddenly nodded and muttered, "He's right." Then someone else, an older man in a camouflage jacket, murmured, "Ain't no need to talk to a lady like that, especially not with her babies standing there." The tide was turning. The two men sensed it. The guy with the earpiece shifted uncomfortably. He stated, his voice quieter, "We didn't intend any harm. Just some playful interaction." Roderick turned, shaking his head gently. "If causing distress to someone attempting to nourish her children is your idea of fun, a serious self-assessment is necessary." He spoke with clarity, avoiding raised voices or dramatic displays, simply stating facts. The tattooed man muttered something almost inaudible and began to leave. His companion followed suit. Vince made no attempt to detain them. Roderick did not pursue them either. His purpose wasn't to engage in a confrontation. It was to be witnessed asserting himself. Someone had done it, so that woman, her kids, and anyone else in the store would know. Vince remained behind, hands on his hips. "I'll speak with them if they return," he offered, his voice lacking conviction. Roderick didn't respond to him. He turned to the woman instead. "Are you all right?" She looked at him for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear. "Yes, thank you." The little boy peered out from behind his mother's hoodie, his eyes moving between her and Roderick. He remained silent, but he no longer seemed frightened. Roderick offered the kid a small smile. "You assisted your mother today. You performed well." The boy's lips moved slightly, as though he desired to return the smile, but hesitated. The mother then spoke. "People generally remain silent. They simply observe," Roderick confirmed. "Yes, I understand. I have been one of those individuals," he stated, meaning his words sincerely. He had remained quiet in different locations, different circumstances, not out of concurrence, but because it was simpler, unlike this time. Just as things seemed to be calming, the boy spoke, causing Roderick to hesitate more than any comment from the adults. Roderick was preparing to take his basket and allow them to proceed without interruption when the boy looked up and quietly asked, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" The unexpectedness and innocence of the question stopped Roderick in his tracks. The woman immediately turned, her eyes widening. "Baby, please don't say that." Roderick chuckled softly, not in derision, but in genuine surprise. He knelt down to be at the boy's eye level. "No, I'm not your bodyguard," he said, "but I noticed something that seemed amiss. And sometimes, when something is wrong, it's important to speak up." The boy appeared puzzled. "Even if it's not your mother," Roderick paused. "Particularly if it's not your mother." The mother retrieved her bag and reached for her son's hand. "Say thank you," she murmured, her voice remaining calm, but detached. "Thank you," the boy replied. His voice was softer now. Roderick rose, observing their preparations to depart. The toddler had fallen asleep against his sister's shoulder within the cart. The mother offered him a courteous nod, then refocused on her children and proceeded towards the door. Roderick remained standing for a moment longer, his basket dangling limply in his hand. His anger had subsided. He felt weary of encountering individuals who believed they could utter whatever they pleased to whomever, without repercussions. He was weary of seeing children learn those lessons without realizing it. He also felt frustrated by missed opportunities, moments that required the courage to speak up. He walked down the bread aisle, but suddenly everything felt wrong. He no longer felt like shopping. His appetite had disappeared near the frozen pizza. He drifted towards the self-checkout, considering he might just grab a drink, something cold, and leave. As he turned the corner, he saw them once more, the mother and her children, positioned by the vending machines close to the exit. She was searching her purse, likely looking for coins. Her son was sitting on the bench, softly rocking his sleeping sister. Roderick lessened his pace. A portion of him desired to continue walking. He believed he had already fulfilled his responsibility. However, something about her expression. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was weariness. The kind of weariness that doesn't dissipate with rest. The weariness that accumulates over years of being overlooked, criticized, and disregarded. He moved closer, deliberately. "Got enough for the machine?" he inquired. She looked up, visibly surprised. "Oh, I was just checking if I'd change," she explained, adding, "I told him he could choose a snack if he waited patiently." Roderick reached into his pocket and produced a few wrinkled dollar bills. "Let me assist," he offered. She paused. "I didn't request," she began, but he gently interrupted. "You didn't." "I'm offering," she finished. Her expression subtly hardened. It was pride. It mirrored the clothing his mother used to wear. It was the sort of person who prefers self-reliance, yet recognizes respectful assistance when it's provided. She nodded once, her movement now with less uncertainty. Her son selected a pack of cookies and a juice. Roderick inserted the payment and observed the machine's mechanical sounds as it dispensed the item, resembling a somewhat awkward expression of gratitude. "What's your name?" she asked. Roderick extended his hand. "Tanya. Tanya Wells." A tremor passed between them, a connection felt beyond a simple meeting. Her gaze settled on him, clear and unwavering, devoid of gratitude or obligation. Just even. No response was needed back there, she observed. "I know," Roderick replied, "but I didn't want your son to perceive that silence as typical," she confessed, pausing briefly before directing her attention to her boy, who was eagerly opening a package of cookies, as if it were Christmas. "I hope he remembers your face," she said, and Roderick remained silent. He was at a loss for words. However, before he could leave, Tanya posed a question he hadn't anticipated, causing him to observe her and himself with a new perspective. "You got kids?" Tanya inquired. Roderick was taken aback by the question. It was delivered so casually, as if requesting directions. Yet, the underlying significance felt more substantial than the words suggested. He paused, then offered a slight shrug. "No, not mine anyway. My niece has been staying with me. Her mom works nights at the hospital." Tanya nodded, indicating she understood. "So you're the safe place for somebody?" Roderick hesitated. He hadn't previously considered that perspective. He wasn't intentionally trying to be a safe place for anyone. He was simply providing assistance, doing what was necessary. However, the way she phrased it caused a feeling of constriction in his chest. "Trying to be," he replied. They paused briefly in that unusual area situated between two vending machines and an automatic door, which repeatedly opened and closed as customers passed. The exterior air grew darker. The store's illumination made the location feel colder than it actually was. Tanya carefully removed her daughter from the cart, cradling her in one arm. The toddler shifted, appearing drowsy but making no noise. "You don't speak as if you're frightened," she stated. "I wasn't," Roderick responded. He didn't express a desire for confrontation. She observed, receiving a slight smile in response. "I've experienced conflict before," he stated. "It hasn't altered much. Words did today." Roderick remained silent initially, because, honestly, he wasn't certain what the day had altered, if anything at all. The men departed as if everything were normal. Vince, the manager, offered little resistance. The majority of onlookers simply remained still and watched. However, her son had smiled, and Tanya was still present, standing tall. That surely had to signify something. At that moment, the automatic door opened once more, and the two men from before re-entered. Roderick's body stiffened immediately. Tanya's did too. She held her daughter closer. Her son slid off the bench and moved behind her, as if trying to disappear. However, the men didn't glance in their direction. They kept their gaze ahead, bypassed Roderick entirely, and proceeded toward the rear of the store. Perhaps they would return for beer. Or perhaps they had simply forgotten something. They remained silent. They avoided eye contact. They didn't even acknowledge our presence. Roderick didn't pursue them. He didn't need to. Tanya released a long, deep breath. "I anticipated an attempt." "They will not," Roderick stated calmly. "Not tonight." A few feet away, the teenage cashier, the same one who had averted her gaze previously, was now maneuvering a small cart of returns toward the register. She halted as she passed Roderick. "I observed what you did," she said quietly. Roderick turned to her. She looked over at Tanya and her children. "I regret not saying anything," she thought. Roderick nodded thoughtfully. "You will next time." The girl offered a slight, almost self-conscious smile and departed. She made no attempt to turn back. Tanya looked down at her son. "Come on, dear." He clasped her hand, holding tightly onto the cookie pack. Roderick observed them as they walked towards the parking lot, the little girl now fully awake and rubbing her eyes against her mother's shoulder. Tanya glanced back once, their eyes connecting briefly. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a farewell. Simply a silent recognition, genuine and sufficient. He turned to depart, retrieving his overlooked basket, stepping back to do so. Yet, something felt altered. The eggs could wait. So too could the milk. As he walked out into the night, a personal realization sparked within him, a feeling connected to his past that he hadn't considered in years, triggering a memory with unexpected force. Roderick did not go home immediately. He remained in his truck in the parking lot, with the window rolled halfway down, allowing the warm Baton Rouge air to flow in as the sky transitioned from gray to black. The grocery store lights hummed behind him, fluorescent and seemingly without end, stretching long shadows across the parking lot. He gazed forward for a considerable time, his hands resting on the steering wheel, the engine off, not because he anticipated something, simply thinking, dwelling on a weighty feeling. That boy's question, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" repeated in his mind, and the way Tanya had said, "You're the safe place for somebody." He hadn't anticipated either of those sentiments to linger, but they had. The recollection that surfaced wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was subtle and understated. Perhaps that's why it affected him so deeply. He was 10, waiting in line with his mother at a corner store just outside Port Allen. It was summer, and his shoes were 2 sizes too small. His mother had been working 3 part-time jobs since his dad left. On that day, her EBT card malfunctioned. The cashier, a man with a slicked-back mullet, told her to move aside. Publicly. Next, the man announced, "This woman can't pay." Roderick recalled hearing sighs and shuffles from the people trailing behind them. Someone even chuckled. His mother didn't shed any tears. She simply stood, attempting to understand where things had gone amiss. Her hands had shaken as she entered the numbers on the keypad. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, as though intense focus might somehow resolve the issue. A man in a gray work shirt, a stranger standing behind them, moved forward and paid. He did so silently, without a word or explanation, simply sliding a 20 across the counter as if it were inconsequential. Roderick also remembered the man's boots. They were scuffed. The clothes were soiled, as if he'd worn them for years. His mother expressed her gratitude 3 times. The man simply replied, "It's all right," and departed. Roderick never forgot that. Not because of the money, but because for one moment someone chose to prevent his mom from feeling insignificant. And now, all these years later, he'd unknowingly become that man. He leaned back in his seat and rubbed his hands over his face. Safe place for somebody, he muttered, half to himself. He hadn't always gotten it right. There had been moments he remained silent when he ought to have spoken. Instances where he averted his gaze. But tonight he did not. And that felt significant, not a resolution, but a beginning. He reached into the glove compartment and retrieved the small notebook where he recorded grocery lists and budget details. He turned to the rear, located a vacant page, and penned 3 words. Speak. Stand. Stay. He wasn't certain why he wrote them that way, but it felt correct. Like a prompting, like a key. A collection of teenagers in hoodies walked by his truck, laughing and jostling each other, having just left the store with Slurpees and bags of chips. One of them made eye contact and offered a brief nod of recognition. It wasn't elaborate, just a quick movement of the chin. Roderick returned the gesture subtly. He started the engine. The radio began playing softly, featuring an old Otis Redding song. He allowed it to play for a minute before lowering the volume. As he continued his journey, he observed a city bus stop where a mother and her daughter waited, illuminated by the weak light of a street lamp. The young girl rested against her mom's shoulder, seemingly dozing. Roderick reduced his speed as he rounded the bend. That scene also resonated with him. He thought of so many mothers in this area, striving to manage everything, holding on with worn-out resources, and bearing the burden of groceries, children, and societal expectations as if it were simply an obligation. Sadly, they often go unnoticed. He drove into his driveway, turned off the truck, and paused for a moment. But prior to entering the house, he reviewed the notebook one last time, making a silent vow that would resonate well into the future. Roderick stood on his porch beneath a wavering light bulb. The screen door groaned as he opened it. Inside, the modest house held the scent of aged timber and laundry detergent. Lainey was curled up on the couch under a blanket, a textbook resting on her knees and a pencil in her mouth. She looked up as he entered. "You're gone forever," she said. He dropped his keys onto the side table. "Yeah, I ran into something unexpected." "Like what?" Roderick hesitated. She asked it so casually, unaware that her uncle had just been standing between a mother and 2 grown men poised to overwhelm her regarding a shopping trip. How would you explain that to a 12-year-old so it doesn't feel overwhelming? "I witnessed someone being treated unfairly." I said something. Lainey looked at him. "Did you argue with him?" He chuckled, sounding weary. "No, it wasn't necessary." "Did it make a difference?" He nodded. "It did." Lainey returned to her book, as if that was a sufficient explanation, but Roderick remained standing. He found himself repeatedly recalling Tanya's expression, or her son's inquiry, or the realization that for a brief period that grocery store had served as a learning experience, not only for a frightened little boy or a weary young mother, but for all those within hearing distance, and for him. Roderick had previously believed that demonstrating courage meant confronting situations directly and forcefully, that unless it involved a significant display, it was inconsequential. However, tonight brought a shift in perspective. As his actions were met with silence rather than recognition, they did not become a popular topic. No phones were used. There were no news reports, no widely shared videos. Just a mother, a child, and a man who chose to act instead of remaining silent. Perhaps that's what the world needs, discrete actions that have a subtle impact. Ordinary individuals who recognize an injustice and voice their concerns, prioritizing integrity over apathy. He entered the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. His hands remained stiff. He didn't notice until he placed the cup on the counter. Lainey's lunchbox sat on the counter. He opened it, almost automatically, to see if she's left anything behind. Inside, he found a half-eaten apple and a note he's written her earlier that morning. "You got this. I'm proud of you." He paused, looking at it. 4 short words on a sticky note. "And she's kept it." That affected him more than he anticipated, because it reminded him that words don't need to be forceful to resonate. They don't have to be flawless to be significant. He returned to the living room, settled beside Lainey, and observed the math homework she was finding difficult. "Do you need some help?" she offered, silently passing him a pencil. While they solved the problems together, he looked at her. This small, brilliant, stubborn girl, unaware of how frequently the world would challenge her and how vital it would be to advocate for those unable to do so themselves. He wished she would retain this memory of him. He wanted her to recognize someone who championed another person, unrelated and undeserving of such action, yet still in need of protection. That's the essence of strength he hoped she'd see. After finishing the final problem, Lainey looked up and said, "You're like one of the good guys, huh?" Roderick smiled. A genuine smile this time. He tried to convey. She nodded, seeming pleased. "Good." A silence fell between them. The television hummed softly in the background. A dog barked once from somewhere beyond, then fell silent. Roderick relaxed against the couch, allowing the stillness to descend. He wasn't obligated to act as a bodyguard. He simply needed to demonstrate that he cared. And for this evening, that was sufficient. Should you ever witness someone facing unjust treatment and feel compelled to intervene, honor that impulse. Offer a word. Take action. Even minor deeds hold significance. They instruct. They safeguard. They are important. If this narrative resonated with you, even slightly, please share it. Perhaps someone else needs to read this today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Real stories like this deserve to be shared. The CEO, known for his quiet demeanor, entered his own dealership incognito. What he overheard a salesman say to a struggling single mother abruptly halted him and initiated an unforeseen sequence of events. Derek Belton appeared unremarkable, certainly not the person who authorized salaries for 137 employees. He wasn't wearing a blazer, didn't carry a briefcase, and he arrived without a driver. That morning, he wore faded Levi's, well-worn sneakers, and a Tennessee Titans cap shading his face. He would be unrecognizable, even to the regional manager he had dined with 2 Fridays prior. He parked his black 2011 Honda Accord a short distance away. It wasn't a necessity. He possessed the means for a garage full of luxury vehicles. However, today was not about displays of wealth. He walked the additional block quietly, noticing the texture of the pavement with each footfall. As the dealership appeared, the signage, crisp and prominent, displaying Belton Auto Group across the glass, caused him to hesitate. His name. But what was happening beneath the surface? The concerns had initially surfaced as quiet remarks. A customer in Murfreesboro reported being sold an extended warranty she didn't comprehend. A family in Franklin alleged their monthly payment differed from the agreed-upon amount. These were minor issues. However, they caused Derek to question things. This location in Charlotte, Tennessee had consistently been a high-volume dealership. It specialized in mid-range vehicles and enjoyed strong sales. People trusted this dealership, or they once did. The showroom doors opened as he entered. The air held the scent of coffee and Armor All. A bell chimed above him, yet no one acknowledged it. Derek surveyed the area. There were 3 sales desks and 2 salesmen engaged in conversation by the corner water cooler. A woman managed the reception desk, absorbed in her phone. He appeared unremarkable, and that was his intention. He began his assessment in the service bay. It was quiet, the technicians working diligently, focused on their tasks. He observed nothing unusual. He proceeded through the customer waiting area, observing a man browse a magazine as his daughter entertained herself on a damaged iPad. He received no assistance. There was no greeting, not even a simple acknowledgement. He approached the line of Camrys situated near the glass wall. A couple stood close by, engaged in a conversation with a salesman whose speech was rapid and overly enthusiastic. The older man appeared displeased. The woman seemed bothered. "Sir," the salesman stated, "you won't locate a more advantageous offer anywhere. This item is covered by warranty and has seen minimal use. However, I can offer this price only if we finalize the agreement today." "That's the current situation," Derek mentioned. He recognized this as a tactic he hadn't been taught and made a note to himself. He then proceeded around a corner close to the used inventory office and paused. A young woman, likely in her late 20s, wearing a light jacket and carrying a baby in a carrier, was speaking with a man in a navy blazer. She appeared anxious, repeatedly looking down at a well-worn envelope she held. It likely contained pay stubs or a bank statement. The salesman presented himself with an assured, perhaps overly confident, demeanor, speaking with charm and certainty. "You're receiving full coverage for the first 3 years?" The salesman stated. "Bumper to bumper plus powertrain. If anything breaks, even the air conditioning, it's covered." That was inaccurate. And the $895 fee I referenced, that's standard practice. We apply that to all our transactions. It covers a comprehensive pre-delivery inspection, interior cleaning, and anti-theft VIN etching. Derek paused. VIN etching? That practice had been removed from the dealership's process 3 years prior. And warranty coverage? No, that wasn't consistent with the terms. He had personally revised those contracts to ensure greater honesty and transparency. His pulse decelerated. He retreated a step back, out of their line of sight, heart pounding, but not from anger. It was disappointment. This was his business. This was his name. And this man was deceiving, with ease, a woman who appeared to have saved every cent to be present. Derek wasn't prepared to show himself. Not yet. He needed to observe the situation's extent. Derek moved discreetly behind a row of brochures close to the finance office, watching unseen. The woman nodded slowly in response to the salesman's words. Her fingers closed more firmly around the envelope. The baby in the carrier shifted and emitted a quiet whimper, but she seemed largely unaware. She was attempting to remain calm, likely assessing how closely the figures aligned with her budget. The salesman leaned in, lowering his voice. "You don't need to worry," he said. "People get nervous about credit checks, but I know how to navigate the process. I'll get you into a vehicle today, even if we have to be resourceful." She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the exit. But the salesman kept his tone steady, reassuring. Too smooth, too confident, Derek clenched his jaw, then turned away. He didn't want her to feel observed. He walked towards the far end of the showroom, where a teenage boy was standing near a pre-owned SUV. A salesman passed him twice, without a greeting or any offer of assistance. He simply walked by. Derek moved next to the boy. "You're considering this one?" he asked. The teen looked over, seemingly a little taken aback. "Yeah, possibly. My aunt is outside. She asked me to check it out while she parks." Derek nodded. "Do you know what kind of engine it has?" The kid shrugged. "Not really. She simply requires a secure environment. Her vehicle malfunctioned last week, another incident. Another customer was missed. It was hurtful, not due to the lost transaction, but because it confirmed everything for Derek. At some point, they had ceased to listen, stopped acknowledging individuals. And it wasn't just a single problematic employee. It was a prevailing attitude, a recurring behavior. He proceeded towards the reception desk. The woman still hadn't looked up. She tapped her screen, chewing her gum, scrolling. Derek positioned himself in front of her, simply to gauge the situation. 10 seconds elapsed. Then 20. At last, she raised her head and blinked. "Oh, do you have an appointment?" "No," Derek replied calmly. "Just browsing." She responded with a languid smile, gesturing vaguely towards the floor. "They'll get to you." They did not. For the subsequent 30 minutes, Derek moved between various departments. The only assistance he received came from a young lot attendant named Trevor, who appeared to be no older than 19. He noticed Derek close to the service entrance and offered, "Sir, do you need anything? We have water inside. I can get you a brochure if you're interested in the new hybrids." Derek smiled and replied, "I'm good. Thank you." He then asked, "What's your name?" Trevor responded, "Trevor." "Do you like it here, Trevor?" Trevor paused. "It's all right. People can be rude. Not just customers, but sometimes managers too. I prefer to keep to myself." "Do they treat customers fairly?" Trevor looked down. Most of the time. There was no bitterness in his tone. Derek placed a reassuring hand on the kid's shoulder. "Be careful who teaches you what," he advised. Trevor looked at him, then nodded. Before Derek could say anything further, A familiar laugh came from the glass hallway. Brent Collar, the salesman, was now leading the young mother toward a side office. Her name tag said Brent Collar. She appeared overwhelmed, holding her papers tightly. Derek kept a discreet distance as he watched. Brent paused before the office door, retrieved paperwork from a file, and announced, "Here's the first quote. It's going to appear high initially, but please don't worry. I'll adjust it once I input your information into the system. This is our standard procedure." Derek moved nearer, feigning interest in a flyer on the wall. From his position, he observed the quote. The figures were inflated. Listed were charges for warranty, dealership fees, VIN etching, and a maintenance guarantee, all non-standard and unapproved. This was everything Derek had worked to eliminate years prior. Brent, however, did not appear to be a person apprehensive about disregarding regulations. He presented as someone who believed no one was observing. Brent indicated for the woman to take a seat. She settled into the chair, moving her baby's carrier to the floor nearby. The little girl made a soft whimpering sound and kicked gently, yet Brent did not even look down. His gaze remained focused on the documents he held, turning pages, emphasizing sections, and drawing circles. Each action appeared rehearsed, refined, and routine. "We're going to structure this to ensure your monthly payment stays under $350, he stated. The woman offered a slow, cautious nod. "What's your name again?" he inquired, barely looking up. "Monique," she replied. "Monique Ellis." Derek stood just outside the office, back against the wall, feigning interest in the certified pre-owned display. He overheard every word. Brent smiled. "All right, Monique. You're going to love this. You're approved for a 2019 Corolla. Excellent condition, low mileage. That's a significant advantage. We remain committed to your protection. Therefore, we're providing a 3-year full coverage plan. This includes everything from the engine to the electronics. Roadside assistance is also included should you lock your keys in the car. That level of peace of mind? Priceless." Derek's hand slowly curled into a fist by his side. However, there was no such plan, not like Brent described it. And the quote, the one he'd caught a glimpse of earlier, had extra charges tucked in every margin. Some of them were outright fiction. Monique adjusted in her chair. "So, is all of that included in the price?" Brent offered a warm, reassuring smile. "It's all part of your protection package. We simply itemize it separately on the form. This simplifies things for the finance office." He continued, speaking rapidly and with excessive confidence, gesturing with a pen as if performing a magic trick. He even produced a calculator to minimize the appearance of the payment amount. For example, without the package, your monthly cost would be $384. With the included safeguard, the price reduces to $349. More manageable, isn't it? Derek scrutinized the figures. That calculation appeared illogical. It seemed like a deceptive tactic. He couldn't fathom how Brent maintained his composure. But it was evident this wasn't his first presentation. Then Monique posed a question that silenced the room. Do you believe I could return tomorrow?" she inquired softly. "I simply want to ensure I fully grasp everything first." Brent's demeanor subtly altered, a nearly imperceptible change. His jaw tightened briefly. However, he quickly regained his composure, adopting a more affable tone. "I completely understand," he said smoothly. "But the situation is that this car has 2 other potential buyers. One of them test drove it earlier today. I can't guarantee it will still be available tomorrow. You wouldn't want to miss out because of a minor consideration, would you?" Monique blinked. Her fingers shifted around her envelope. "I simply—" Brent quietly lowered his voice, leaning closer. "Listen, I've witnessed individuals leave, intending to consider it further overnight. Then the car was gone, and they were facing a situation that was more difficult and costly. You deserve something better, and this is it." He pushed the documents across to her. That was the end of it. Derek entered the office, maintaining a calm but resolute tone. "That doesn't sound like the protection plan we provide," Brent said, blinking. Monique turned to Derek, appearing surprised. Brent quickly regained his composure. "Pardon me?" Derek repeated. "The plan you're describing doesn't exist, not in that form." Brent lifted an eyebrow, assessing Derek. "Do you work here?" "Something like that." Brent chuckled dryly. Look, I don't know who you are, but I've been here for 4 years. I know the packages inside and out. Derek pointed to the quote. Show me where it says full electronics coverage. Show me where VAR and etching is required. Show me the breakdown. Brent hesitated. It's in the system. Finance will explain it better. No, Derek said flatly. You explain it right now. Monique rose slowly in front of her, holding her baby close. Brent's face flushed. I don't have to deal with this. You're not even. But he stopped speaking. The general manager had just appeared behind Derek, his eyes wide. Mr. Belton, the manager said. Brent's mouth dropped open. Derek didn't smile, didn't say a word. He turned toward Monique. I'm sorry, he said softly. This isn't how we treat people. Not here, not under my name. But this wasn't over, not yet. The repercussions extended beyond a single falsehood. The room seemed to contract the instant the name, Mebleton, was spoken. Brent's complexion turned ashen. His assured demeanor disappeared, as if it were vapor on a chilled surface. Monique looked back and forth between the two men, bewildered, still cradling her baby, uncertain of the situation she's entered. Derek subtly turned to the general manager, standing in the doorway. He requested a conference room, speaking softly. Jeff Lorman, the manager, a man with a flushed face, nodded and indicated a hallway located at the rear of the showroom. Derek turned to Monique and spoke in a quiet, reassuring voice. Please come with me. I want to correct this. She paused briefly, then followed. Her movements were deliberate but hesitant. The baby began to stir again, perhaps reacting to the palpable tension. As they passed the workstations, the entire level appeared to become silent. Telephones ceased their ringing, and conversations were interrupted. Several employees glanced over their workstations and angled towards one another, speaking quietly. Trevor, the lot attendant from earlier, positioned himself close to the entrance and offered Derek a knowing look, but remained silent. Within the compact, glass-enclosed conference room, Derek drew out a chair for Monique and settled opposite her. Jeff entered behind them, appearing noticeably uneasy. Brent followed, attempting to seem unconcerned, but without success. He folded his arms and rested against the distant wall. Derek took the folder Brent had put on the table. Is this the quote you gave her? He asked, not looking up. Brent moved slightly. Yes. Derek opened the folder, laid out the pages, and circled several numbers with a pen from the table's holder. Explain these, he said. Brent sat up straighter. Look, I don't know why I'm being questioned. Explain them, Brent paused. He looked at Jeff, hoping for support, but Jeff avoided his gaze. I mean, those are standard charges. Everyone includes them. Do you have documentation showing these fees were authorized? Derek inquired. They should be in the system. No, they aren't, Derek replied, his voice gaining strength. I was involved in revising the system. That VIN etching fee? It was discontinued in 2021. Powertrain coverage? It's limited to 5 years, not the comprehensive coverage you advertised. You added more than $2,000 in fabricated fees to a customer who came here simply trying to purchase a secure vehicle for her baby. Monique's hands trembled a little as she listened, but she did not speak. Her gaze remained on the document. You stated the payment would be $349, Dara proceeded. That is achievable only if she provides a down payment you failed to disclose. Furthermore, the interest rate you presented to her is inflated by a minimum of 2.5%. You are not just misleading Brent, you are being dishonest. Brent moved away from the wall and straightened. I have consistently met my quarterly goals. Customers leave satisfied. I understand sales, all right? Derek moved closer. You know how to apply undue influence. A distinction exists. Jeff finally spoke. Derek, I didn't know he was doing all that, I swear. We've been busy and the numbers have been good. That's exactly the problem, Derek interjected. You cared about the numbers, I cared about the people. Monique rose then, slowly, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. I thought this was a good place, she said quietly. I really thought this was different. Derek turned to her. It was supposed to be. And I'm sorry it wasn't. He reached into his back pocket, retrieved his wallet, and produced a card. This is my direct line. I will personally ensure you receive a fair deal. If you desire the car, You'll obtain it at the correct price, free of unnecessary complications. She accepted the card deliberately. Thank you, she said. We'll have someone else manage the paperwork, Derek added. Someone who doesn't fabricate figures. Brent's arms fell to his sides. Clean out your desk, Derek stated, rising. You are terminated here. There was no room for discussion. You were aware of that, yet disregarded it. Brent didn't object further. He left abruptly, speaking quietly to himself. No one pursued him. Derek addressed Jeff. We aren't finished talking either. He stated, I'll see you in your office in 10. Subsequently, he held the door for Monique and guided her back towards the lobby. People glanced around. Conversations began anew, subdued and apprehensive. Derek remained silent until they arrived at the reception desk. He regarded the woman seated there. Did you greet her upon her arrival? The receptionist hesitated, then swallowed. I don't recall. Derek slowly shook his head. Begin to recall, or begin searching. However, dismissing a single employee wouldn't resolve the underlying issues. Derek recognized that a cultural shift was necessary, or the company would decline from within. Derek was seated alone in Jeff Lorman's office, gazing out at the dealership floor through the blinds. A heavy silence filled the room. From behind the closed door, the usual showroom sounds had resumed. The usual sounds filled the office, casual chatter, the click of footsteps on tile, and ringing phones. However, a new feeling now permeated the atmosphere, a sense of unease. He glanced up as Jeff entered, his movements uncertain. The man appeared diminished, as if suddenly aware of his oversight. Jeff took a seat without prompting. I was unaware, he said softly. I truly swear to you, Derek, I wasn't aware Brent was engaging in that activity. But you were aware of something, Derek responded. You knew complaints were increasing. You were aware that deals were becoming more competitive. You were also aware that customer satisfaction scores decreased last quarter, and you attributed it to the surveys used. Jeff remained silent. Derek moved forward, resting his elbows on the desk. What happened to what we created here? He asked. I thought we were performing well, Jeff stated. The numbers were strong. Staff turnover was minimal. I assumed perhaps the industry simply shifted slightly. The industry didn't shift, Derek responded, maintaining a calm tone. We did. We lost sight of why people initially came here. We ceased prioritizing customer relationships and began focusing on achieving sales targets. Jeff sighed, massaging his face. So what's the plan? We need a thorough overhaul, Derek stated. And that extends beyond dismissing Brent. I require a review of every transaction from the past 90 days. Reimburse any clients where the terms weren't transparently conveyed. Furthermore, I want individual meetings with each salesperson. I need to understand their training processes, the priorities they receive, and to identify anyone else who believes it's acceptable to deceive customers with a friendly demeanor. Jeff acknowledged slowly. And one more thing, Derek added, I want Trevor in my office next week. Jeff blinked. The lot kid? Derek replied, yeah, he's one of the only ones who looked a customer in the eye today. That matters. A knock at the door interrupted them. The receptionist appeared, visibly nervous. Mr. Belton, the customer, Monique Ellis, is still in the lounge, she said. She said she's waiting for her ride. Derek stood. Please get her a bottle of water and offer her a seat in the private lounge, away from the plastic chairs near the vending machine. Make sure she feels valued. The receptionist acknowledged promptly and went to attend to the request. Derek returned to the showroom. Several employees glanced up, but there was no conversation. Some consciously avoided eye contact. Monique was situated in the far corner, her baby now asleep in the carrier beside her. She appeared weary, not only physically, but also emotionally drained. He approached her gently. This is a lot, he admitted. More than you anticipated, she replied with a gentle smile. I've faced tougher situations, he stated. I understand that, but you shouldn't have had to experience this, she said, shrugging. People deceive me frequently. It happens at work, in shops, and even at the clinic. I'm accustomed to it. That comment resonated more deeply than he anticipated. You shouldn't be exposed to that, and certainly not here. That's my responsibility. She then focused on him, truly observing him. Why did you come in today? Why are you dressed like that? Derek offered a soft smile. She stifled a quiet chuckle, noting people rarely shared the full truth with the man in the suit. He then presented her with a small folder. If you're still interested in that car, these are the accurate figures. There are no hidden details. I had our finance manager verify them directly. Furthermore, we've included a year of service maintenance at no cost. Her eyebrows rose in surprise. Why? He replied, because someone needs to remind this place of its values. Shortly after, a silver hatchback, distinguished by a missing hubcap, arrived to take her away. Her sister signaled from the driver's seat. Monique rose, corrected the carrier, and glanced back at Derek. "Don't let them ruin what you built," she said. "I won't," he replied. She exited without a backward look. But restoring Monique's confidence was not the only task. It involved rebuilding the confidence of every person who had ever entered those doors. Derek returned 3 days later. This time, there was no disguise, no cap, no jeans. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit and entered through the front doors as if he belonged. And in truth, he did. This wasn't intended as a display of dominance. It was a matter of responsibility. The entire staff had received notification that morning. Scheduled meetings were canceled, and phone lines were redirected to voicemail. The dealership remained open, but no sales transactions would occur prior to 11 a.m. Derek had arranged a company-wide meeting, and every employee attended, including those on part-time shifts. The group assembled in the break room, squeezed together amongst vending machines and aged chairs. Several were leaning against the walls. Trevor stood toward the rear, his arms crossed, but attentive. Jeff was seated near the front, a notebook open but unused. Derek addressed them, speaking plainly without a microphone or podium. "I established this company in 2004, he began, not through investors or a franchise agreement, but with a used car lot situated behind a barbecue joint in Murfreesboro. During the first week, I sold 3 cars, personally washing each one. Some individuals quietly expressed amusement. At that time, I wasn't sure if I would succeed, but I possessed 2 valuable assets: my reputation and my commitment to honesty. I consistently ensured I could fulfill any promise made and avoided dishonesty when closing deals." The atmosphere in the room was now quiet. However, a significant shift has occurred, he continued. "This isn't limited to a single salesperson. It's about how we compromise on minor details and prioritize speed over customer care. We've begun to see individuals as sales goals, rather than human beings. That's not what I built. That's not who we are." He looked around the room. "If you've ever included an additional charge because you believed you could, if you've ever hurried a woman out the door because she didn't appear to be able to afford our services, if you've ever spoken condescendingly to someone simply because you were able, today marks a turning point." A few people visibly expressed discomfort. "You have a choice," he said. The situation demanded a resolution, either assistance or a new employment opportunity. Silence followed, then a voice spoke up. It was Trevor, Mr. Belton, and Derek turned to him. "Yeah," Trevor said, appearing nervous, but proceeding anyway. "What if some of us were performing well, but no one acknowledged it?" Derek smiled. "Then we need to start noticing. Starting today," he walked over and handed Trevor a small envelope. Inside was a letter of promotion, from lot attendant to junior sales associate, including full training and benefits. Trevor blinked. "Are you serious?" Derek stated, "Because the people who treat others with respect are the ones I want representing my name." Following the meeting, changes occurred rapidly. Brent's deals were reviewed. 5 of them necessitated full or partial refunds. Monique's case served as the focus of a training seminar. Every single manager was obligated to participate in a 3-week ethics and customer care workshop. Derek even re-engaged a retired employee. Arlene Cupp, a direct woman in her 60s who previously managed the front desk, had departed 2 years prior, citing a change in the atmosphere. She was now the new head of customer relations. Arlene's initial action involved installing a glass wall separating the sales desk and the finance office, ensuring transparency in all communications. Derek walked through the lot that Friday, observing the staff's interactions. A subtle shift permeated the atmosphere, not flawless, but calmer, more deliberate, stemming from understanding rather than apprehension. He observed a young salesperson patiently explaining trim level differences to an older gentleman, ensuring he was heard. This detail, absent from any spreadsheet, held greater significance than any monthly performance goal. Arlene approached. It appears they recall their employer, she remarked, and rightfully so. Derek responded, stating he wasn't leaving, although one element remained. The core reason for this endeavor needed to be revisited. That Sunday morning, Derek was seated on the porch of his mother's former residence in Jackson, Tennessee. The sun had just begun to rise, and the air retained the stillness of the early hours. He took his coffee slowly, looking out at the yard he previously mowed every Saturday during his teenage years. Years had passed since her passing, yet the atmosphere of the place remained unchanged. Now, it belonged to him, recollection solidified in brick and wood. He retrieved a photograph from his jacket pocket, the image faded with curled edges. The picture showed him, no older than 10, standing next to his mother before a dull, rust-colored Oldsmobile. Her smile was broad and proud, not due to the car's newness as it wasn't, but because it was hers. That marked the day she purchased her first vehicle independently. He recalled how she, a nurse, managed without a cosigner or assistance, relying solely on her paycheck and a salesman who painstakingly explained each document before she signed. Derek remembered her meticulously verifying every detail. He remembered her asking questions, even when her voice wavered, and how the man behind the desk never made her feel inadequate for doing so. He remembered that. And now, decades later, he occupied the man's position behind the desk. He was the man whose name appeared above the showroom. He was the person who influenced every customer's experience upon entering. He looked at the picture once more. That instance profoundly impacted him, teaching him that dignity wasn't something acquired through wealth. It was something inherent, deserved simply by being present and making an effort. The world hadn't been kind to his mother, but on that day, she received recognition, and he carried that with him. Returning to the dealership the following week, Derek requested a new plaque be installed by the entrance. The message stated that we treat each customer as if they were purchasing their first car, demonstrating dignity, patience, and honesty. It wasn't intended for widespread attention or media coverage. The goal was for every employee to read it daily. Trevor read it every morning, first thing. Monique returned a month later to have her car serviced. She entered wearing a hoodie, holding her daughter, and smiled upon seeing Trevor at the desk. "You remember me?" she asked. He smiled in return. "Of course I do. We had her in that silver Corolla, correct?" She affirmed. "She's performing well." They continued their conversation briefly, covering minor details, and the interaction felt comfortable, because now it felt natural. Derek observed from his office, unnoticed, simply watching. He didn't require attention. He desired none. The focus wasn't on him. The purpose was this: you don't establish a successful business solely on profit. You build it on trust, on the manner in which you treat people when you believe no one is observing. He learned that from his mom. He communicated this to others via Brent. And now, with each handshake, each sale, each explanation provided without pressure or misleading information, he was restoring it. Incrementally, deliberately, that's what integrity truly represents. Not something asserted, something safeguarded. For once lost, regaining it demands all your resources. And Derek Belton refused to allow his reputation to signify anything other than honesty. If this story resonated with you personally, if it brought to mind a time you felt disregarded, or a time someone championed you when they weren't obligated to, please subscribe. We have more stories coming that speak to the heart, not just the headline. During a flight, a black pastor was asked to remove his cross. Rather than reacting with anger, he rose and shared a message that captivated everyone. It was a pleasant Friday morning in late April when Pastor Elijah Rowe entered Raleigh-Durham International Airport through the sliding glass doors, pulling a small black carry-on behind him. He wasn't hurried, never was. At 58 years old, Elijah possessed the composed demeanor of someone who understood that serenity wasn't achieved through haste. His flight to Albuquerque was planned with a connection in Kansas City, and Flight 287 would transport him through the initial segment. He was wearing a light cream linen shirt, dark slacks, and worn brown shoes that had been present at numerous potluck dinners and hospital rooms beyond measure. However, what distinguished him wasn't his attire. It was the small wooden cross resting softly against his chest. It wasn't ostentatious or large. No gold, no diamonds, simply a piece of carved wood. The edges softened by years of use. His grandmother had given it to him when he was 18, shortly before her passing. "Wear it when the world forgets who you are," she told him. He hadn't taken off since. At gate C-21, Elijah located a quiet corner seat and retrieved a notepad. He didn't prepare his sermons on a laptop. He favored paper, appreciating the sound of pen against page. This week's message concerned forgiveness, once more. He quietly chuckled to himself. "It feels as though I'm meant to continue sharing what I'm still discovering," he murmured, taking a sip of lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. The boarding call came promptly. He rose, offered a pleasant good morning to the gate agent, and proceeded down the jet bridge. He gave a brief acknowledgement to the flight attendant stationed by the door. A tall woman with a formal demeanor and a precise tone. "Seat 22, Elijah spoke quietly to himself as he walked down the aisle. A young man was already settled into 22B, wearing headphones and a hoodie. Elijah offered a polite smile and took a seat by the window. The boy didn't acknowledge him. That was acceptable. Elijah didn't require conversation to feel at ease. He positioned the cross against his shirt and continued writing in his notebook. After 15 minutes, the cabin door closed. The aircraft began to pull away from the gate. The standard announcements were made, followed by the familiar, somewhat jarring sound as the plane accelerated down the runway. Elijah murmured a brief prayer as the plane ascended into the sky. He was halfway through his outline on Luke 6 when a voice broke his concentration. "Sir," a woman's voice said from the aisle. "Sir, excuse me." Elijah looked up to see the same tall flight attendant from earlier, standing beside him. "Yes, ma'am?" he asked, his eyes gentle. She did not smile. "Could you please tuck your necklace into your shirt?" Elijah blinked. "My cross." She nodded. "We've received some complaints." He looked around, surprised. "From whom?" She replied quickly, "I can't disclose that. We simply request that passengers be considerate of items that may cause discomfort to others." He studied her face for a moment. There was no warmth in it, no opportunity for discussion. "I'm sorry," Elijah said slowly, "but this necklace isn't a display. It's my faith. It was my grandmother's." "Sir, I'm not attempting to argue with you," she said, her voice tightening. "I'm requesting that you please comply with a straightforward request so we can avoid any additional issues." "Is this an airline policy?" Her lips formed a thin line. "I need your cooperation," she stated. The young man in 22B adjusted his hoodie and looked at Elijah, then averted his gaze. Elijah kept his hands still on his notebook. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his tone even quieter this time. "But I won't be hiding it." The flight attendant released a breath through her nose, appearing visibly annoyed. "I'll be back," she said, and then turned and left. Elijah leaned back in his seat and looked out the window. Below them, the clouds spread out, a vast expanse of brilliant white. He touched the cross carefully, his thumb tracing the worn rim. This feeling wasn't unfamiliar, not precisely. Yet it felt altered, as if something had changed, though he couldn't yet identify what. The flight continued, and so did their discussion. The drink cart was 2 rows behind when she returned, without a smile, without warmth. She maintained the same rigid posture and that precise, formal tone, making each word feel like a protocol rather than an exchange. "Sir," she repeated, standing before Elijah's row, her arms now crossed. "I must ask you once more to secure the necklace." A woman 2 rows above expressed that she finds it objectionable. Elijah didn't reply immediately. He observed her intently. Her name tag indicated C. Densmore. Her uniform was immaculate, with not a single thread amiss. She repeatedly looked at the other passengers, seemingly searching for support or an observer. He focused his gaze forward. In row 20, A woman wearing a blue blazer and large sunglasses remained fixedly ahead. She didn't look back, didn't move restlessly, simply waited. "I understand what you're saying," Elijah responded steadily. "But I am innocent. I haven't spoken to anyone. I'm simply sitting here quietly." "Why is this necklace causing a problem?" Claire Dinsmore's jaw tightened. "This isn't concerning your silence. It's important to be thoughtful. If someone finds something you're wearing upsetting, it's fair to ask you to modify it," Elijah stated calmly. "If someone is offended by my faith, I don't believe that gives them the right to suppress it." At that point, her tone changed. A hint of her composure faded. "You're being uncooperative," she said, her voice rising. "I am asking you respectfully, but you are being confrontational," and several heads turned. A woman situated 2 rows back extended into the aisle, observing. A man seated across from Elijah shifted his position to gain a clearer view. Elijah's pulse quickened, though his expression remained unchanged. He glanced toward the young man in 22B. The kid had retrieved his phone, subtly, not overtly. Screen angled upwards, thumb poised above the record button. "I'm not trying to provoke anyone," Elijah said, speaking deliberately. "But I won't conceal my cross. I won't take it away to accommodate another person's ease. I apologize." Claire expressed her disapproval. "Then we may have to escalate this," she stated firmly. "You're refusing to follow a directive from a flight crew member. That's a federal offense," someone exclaimed. "Are you serious?" Another voice inquired from a few rows back. A middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard leaned into the aisle. "He's literally just sitting there," he observed. Claire disregarded him. "I'm going to inform the captain," she declared, maintaining eye contact with Elijah. "We'll handle this when we land." "Of course," Elijah responded. She turned and walked away again, this time with a quicker pace, speaking quietly to another flight attendant as she moved past the drink cart. The ensuing silence felt heavy. Elijah remained still in his seat, his pen still held between his fingers. The pages of his sermon notes shifted gently in the airflow from the overhead vent. Then a quiet voice emerged. "Sir," the boy beside him whispered, almost lost in the plane's hum. "I'm recording, just so you know, in case they attempt anything." Elijah slowly turned his head and offered the boy a thankful nod. "Thank you," he said softly. "I saw everything," the boy added. "She's way out of line," Elijah smiled slightly. "Sometimes it's not about the cross. It's about the person wearing it." The boy remained silent, but glanced down at his phone, which was still recording. 3 rows back, an older black woman whispered something to the person beside her. Her gaze met Elijah's for a brief moment. She offered him a subtle nod, as if acknowledging his presence and understanding his situation. That gesture carried weight. The intercom buzzed, and another attendant, not Claire, delivered a brief announcement regarding anticipated light turbulence. Standard procedure. However, the atmosphere on the plane had changed noticeably. Passengers were no longer solely focused on sleeping or entertainment. They were alert and observant. It wasn't the sort of attention Elijah desired, but his perspective had become secondary. Before the plane could land, an unexpected event occurred, one that even Elijah hadn't anticipated. By the time the plane stabilized after the turbulence warning, Claire Dinsmore returned to the aisle, but she was accompanied by another flight attendant. He was a younger man with dark hair and visibly nervous eyes. His name tag identified him as Jonas Worth, and unlike Claire, he lacked confidence in his demeanor. His steps were hesitant, appearing almost apologetic. "Mr. Rowe," Claire began, ensuring her voice carried to a significant portion of the cabin. "I've spoken with the captain. If you persist in disregarding crew instructions, we might need to take additional measures upon arrival." Elijah remained unperturbed. "I would still appreciate knowing which policy I'm in violation of." "You're becoming argumentative once more," Claire retorted. Jonas moved closer, observing the interaction. "Perhaps we could simply—" Claire interrupted him. "Jonas, I'm managing this." And then it reappeared, that palpable tension, that familiar tone. Elijah stayed seated, outwardly calm, though his heart raced. Behind them, row 19 began to move. "I don't see why he should be made to conceal his cross," A woman with curly red hair and a noticeable Wisconsin accent stated, "I wear a Star of David necklace on every flight. I've never been addressed about it." Claire turned quickly. "Ma'am, I am requesting you refrain from intervening." The woman responded, "I'm not interfering. I'm simply observing that this feels like he's being unfairly targeted." At that moment, something changed noticeably. The atmosphere shifted. Passengers were no longer simply observing, but responding. A gentleman in seat 18D craned his neck. "Is this truly how this airline handles situations?" he inquired. "I'm recording as well, and I understand how swiftly videos spread online." Claire appeared taken aback. She started to speak, then hesitated and closed her mouth. "Elijah," Jonas said quietly, intervening and lowering his tone. "Sir, I apologize truly. You've been entirely respectful. I believe we should reduce the tension. Let's allow this to pass." Claire's cheeks reddened. She looked at Jonas as if he had committed a betrayal. Then, with a visible effort to control herself, she hissed, "He's disregarding a direct order. To do what?" Elijah asked, maintaining his composure. "To conceal a portion of myself that I've carried for 40 years? That doesn't seem correct to me, ma'am." Claire's jaw tightened again. "I am finished." She turned and walked forcefully toward the front of the plane, her shoulders stiff with anger. Jonas remained behind, feeling unsure. "I apologize for all of this," he said softly to Elijah. "I believe she misinterpreted the circumstances," she responded. "I think she understood perfectly," Elijah said calmly. "She simply didn't approve of what she observed." Jonas lowered his gaze, then looked away. The cabin stabilized, but a feeling of unease lingered. Passengers murmured along the aisle, with some visibly shaking their heads. A cough broke the silence. The boy in 22B continued filming. Then Elijah took an unexpected action. He rose to his feet. Without raising his voice or gesturing, he stood in the confined area near his seat and angled himself so those in the surrounding rows could hear. "I don't often speak in public spaces such as this," he began, his voice steady but quiet. "But I believe it's important to say something." One by one, people turned to look at him. "I'm a pastor," he continued. "I serve a small church in Durham. This cross," he raised it carefully between his fingers, "was a gift from my grandmother. She experienced events that many of us only read about. She advised me to wear this when the world attempted to define me." A brief silence followed. "I have not removed it since her funeral. My reason isn't that I believe it improves me, but that it serves as a reminder to remain compassionate. Even when I am not shown kindness." A person in 24C covered their mouth. Another individual in 20F audibly sniffled. "I understand not everyone shares my beliefs. I acknowledge and respect that, but I am certain I have acted appropriately. I remained still, adhered to every guideline, and attempted to be courteous, even when I felt diminished." He addressed Jonas directly. "I do not require being asked to leave this flight. I pose no danger. I am merely a man traveling home to deliver a sermon on forgiveness on Sunday." The atmosphere on the plane was subdued, yet sometimes silence conveys more than words ever could, and the quietness wasn't going to last much longer. Claire had not reappeared since she departed. The whereabouts of Eleanor remained uncertain, whether she was in the galley, visibly upset, or once again speaking with the captain. It was unclear. However, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. It wasn't just one person standing. Instead, a sense of reality had permeated the space, manifesting in every hushed exchange and fleeting look shared among those seated within 30 rows. Elijah quietly resumed his seat, as if finishing a chapter in a novel. He sought no accolades and craved no validation. He simply released a breath. The young man next to him ceased recording, though he kept his phone in hand. "You sure you're pastor?" he inquired softly, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Elijah laughed. "Some Sundays I question it myself," he admitted. The young man chuckled and glanced at his phone screen. "That's already being shared. People need to hear things like that." A few minutes elapsed. Following that, the woman in the blue blazer, the one Claire had mentioned complained about, gradually turned from 2 rows forward. Her sunglasses were now removed. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, with a tense expression, yet there was a gentleness about her. I remained silent. She spoke in a matter-of-fact tone. Elijah lifted his eyebrows. "Mom, I never said I was upset. I didn't mention your necklace." The atmosphere became quiet once more. Several passengers who had been listening seemed interested. "She simply inquired if I was all right," the woman added, and I replied that I hadn't observed anything. "Are you suggesting Claire wasn't truthful?" Someone murmured behind Elijah. The woman in the blazer remained silent. She pivoted, appearing somewhat less confident. Jonas emerged from the front of the plane. His shirt now had a slight wrinkle, as if he's been twisting his hands. He stopped near Elijah's row and bent down a little, speaking quietly. "The captain is aware," he said. "And just so you know, you're not in any trouble. We're not removing you. There's no written reprimand. Nothing." Elijah nodded. "Thank you for letting me know." Jonas expressed regret that things hadn't unfolded differently, noting that occasionally individuals carry emotional burdens that extend beyond physical luggage. Elijah offered a subtle smile in agreement, commenting that this phenomenon is evident in various settings, not just airplanes. Jonas paused, then continued, "I'm not sure if this is inappropriate, but would you be comfortable with me attending your church sometime? I used to go when I was younger, but it's been a long time." Elijah's smile widened. "Certainly. Please do. I'll be sure to reserve a place for you." Jonas gently touched the armrest before departing. As he moved back up the aisle, a woman seated opposite Elijah bent forward. "Pastor," she murmured, "thank you." He observed her. She appeared older, possibly in her 70s. A long green scarf adorned her, and her hands rested in her lap, as if guarding something delicate. "You didn't need to speak," she said, "but you did." "Sometimes silence can feel heavier than a voice," Elijah replied. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "That is precisely it." The boy beside Elijah nudged him gently. Elijah gazed out the window. "Let's just hope I'm preaching the same on Sunday as I'm living right now," he thought. A woman with curly hair, whom he's seen before, spoke from behind. "I think the Lord already gave you your sermon, Pastor," she said. "You just preached it at 35,000 feet. Laughter rippled through the cabin, soft, sincere, and welcome. Conversations started again, moving beyond quiet murmurs. A sense of energy and relief filled the cabin, as if it had expelled something it had been containing. However, Claire was still missing. But when she ultimately returned, she would not be alone, and she would not anticipate what awaited her. Approximately 40 minutes had passed since Claire's disappearance. It was believed she would remain missing until the landing. Yet, just as the seatbelt sign illuminated once more, she reappeared, accompanied by the captain himself. Captain Raymond Stills was in his mid-40s, gray hair buzzed close, weathered skin from years in cockpits. He didn't appear angry. He didn't appear rushed. But there was something in his face, an alert stillness, like someone who had seen far worse and didn't want to make a situation worse than it already was. He stopped beside Elijah's row and crouched slightly, just as Jonas had. "Sir," he said in a low, calm voice, "my name's Ray. I understand there's been some tension on board." Elijah met his gaze directly. "Captain," I remained silent. "This cross I'm wearing appeared to cause concern for a flight attendant. She requested that I conceal it. I declined." Ray observed the necklace, then noted Elijah's composed demeanor. "I appreciate your manner," the captain said. "It's more significant than you realize these days." Claire stood rigidly behind him, her arms crossed. Those seated around appeared to be ignoring the situation, yet no one was wearing headphones. All were attentively listening. "I've spoken with my crew," Ray said, "and I've reviewed the footage." Several passengers had documented portions of the interaction, including the young man seated nearby. Elijah briefly looked at the teenager, who offered a subtle nod, still clutching his phone as if it were a barrier. Ray rose and surveyed the adjacent rows. "I want to be clear," he stated, his voice now more pronounced. "This airline has no rule against religious symbols, be it a cross, a hijab, a yarmulke, or another item. Passengers may express their beliefs provided they do so respectfully. Based on observations, Pastor Rowe has been acting in that manner, prompting nods and applause from several people. Quiet, polite, and without drama, Ray addressed Claire. "We're going to have a more in-depth conversation after we land." Claire offered no reply. Her expression remained unreadable, but her jaw was tense. She turned and walked back toward the galley without another word. Ray leaned toward Elijah. "You're not in trouble. You never were. I apologize on behalf of the crew." "You don't have to," Elijah replied, "but I appreciate it." Ray offered a small smile. "Well, some things are still worth saying." And with that, he returned to the cockpit. Jonas reappeared moments later and quietly offered Elijah a free drink and snack box. "Captain's orders," he said sheepishly. "You deserve at least that," Elijah chuckled. "I'll take the almonds." As the plane began its descent into Kansas City, a different feeling settled over the cabin. People were chatting again, not nervously but openly. Two men who hadn't spoken the whole flight were now exchanging church stories. A young woman pulled out her Bible and started highlighting verses. A toddler across the aisle waved at Elijah, and his mother mouthed, "Thank you." Elijah simply sat back and completed his sermon notes. He wrote, "Forgiveness, but not silence." The older woman in green across the aisle retrieved a pen and wrote something on a napkin, then passed it to Elijah. He unfolded it and read, "You reminded us how to carry grace." "Thank you." He folded the napkin and placed it into his notebook. The plane began its final descent, but there was a quiet sense of closure. It felt as though something had broken and then repaired itself, if only a little. Unbeknownst to Elijah, the event wasn't concluded. The world beyond that plane had already taken notice. Flight 287 landed in Kansas City just after 4:20 p.m. The tires made a soft thumping sound as they touched the runway. The standard chime occurred. Passengers unfastened their seatbelts. The overhead compartments released with a click. Yet, a peculiar stillness permeated the movement, as if no one wished to be the first to disrupt the significance of what had transpired in the air. As the plane taxied toward the gate, a flight attendant, someone other than Claire, announced over the intercom. Her voice sounded nervous, almost shaky. She expressed gratitude for everyone flying with them that day. For those continuing their journey to Albuquerque, boarding would resume shortly after a brief pause. Elijah waited patiently. He consistently prioritized allowing others to disembark first. He remained seated with his hands resting on his notebook, his cross still noticeable as the aisle emptied. When he eventually stood to collect his bag, Jonas greeted him at the plane's front. "Sir," he stated, "there are 2 airport officers just outside the jet bridge. They're not here for you. They simply want to speak briefly with the crew and take a statement." Elijah raised an eyebrow. Was someone pressing charges? "No," they replied, but once the footage started spreading, someone tagged airport security, then a few others. "I suppose people are watching." Elijah stepped off the plane and into the fluorescent-lit walkway. 2 officers stood to the side, but neither approached him. They spoke softly with a woman holding a clipboard, presumably a gate supervisor. Jonas acknowledged him with a nod and returned to the aircraft. Inside the terminal, Elijah located a quiet seat near the window. He retrieved his phone for the first time in hours, revealing 30 new messages, missed calls, and a voicemail from his assistant at the church. However, a notification at the top of the screen caught his attention. A video had gone viral. It was the recording from the teen in seat 22B, now shared on TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. The caption stated, "Flight attendant attempts to embarrass pastor for wearing a cross." See his response. It had over 800,000 views and was increasing. Elijah watched only a few seconds. The video showed him seated calmly, Claire standing over him. Her voice was sharp, his reply quiet and steady. Then it shifted to his impromptu speech, the cross visible between his fingers. He turned the phone face down. He disliked attention, always had. He wasn't a person seeking headlines or clicks. A deeper feeling resonated within him. It wasn't pride, nor was it fear. It was the weight of being observed. A few minutes passed, and the teenager from 22B approached him. "Hey," the boy said, slightly winded. "I'm getting off here. My layover is in KC. I just wanted to say thanks again for not reacting negatively." Elijah smiled. You accomplished more than I did. You spoke the truth, the kid laughed. No, man, you experienced it. I simply captured it on video. He extended his hand. I'm Tyrell, by the way. Elijah, they responded, shaking hands. The boy departed, his phone still in his hand, now with a more upright posture. Elijah reclined and rubbed his eyes. The day's burden began to weigh heavily on him. Immediately, his phone vibrated, displaying a message from his assistant. The church board viewed the video. They requested he address the matter on Sunday. Discussions about it were widespread. He rested his head against the terminal window. Outside, a plane was ascending. The engines created a powerful roar. The sun had descended just enough to illuminate the wings in gold. This was not what he had envisioned. He had come seeking tranquility and found himself amidst turmoil. Yet, perhaps storms were not always intended to be averted. For sometimes, the most profound teachings begin well before the formal setting and resonate far beyond the conclusion of a journey. Sunday morning arrived sooner than Elijah anticipated. He stood behind the pulpit at Grace Fellowship in Durham, the same location where he'd delivered sermons almost every week for the preceding 18 years. However, this time, the atmosphere felt altered. The seating was more densely filled. Unfamiliar faces occupied the pews, some from different churches, and others seemingly from nowhere. Phones were already capturing video before he began speaking. He chose not to start with scripture this time. He advanced, set his notes to the side, and surveyed the audience. Most of you viewed the video. He started. Some of you shared it, while others placed calls. Some expressed anger. Some inquired why I didn't shout, why I didn't call her out, why I didn't fight back. He paused, allowing the atmosphere to become still. I've considered that as well. I've been reflecting on it consistently since. There were no microphone issues, no sounds of discomfort, just a quiet stillness. I remained composed on that plane, not from a place of fragility or fear, but because I've experienced enough to understand that the most prominent voice isn't always the most powerful. Occasionally, fortitude lies in remaining still when every instinct urges action. Occasionally, it's about declining with composure rather than anger, heads affirmed throughout the sanctuary. I didn't display that cross to instigate anyone. I wore it because it serves as a reminder of my identity. And when someone asks you to conceal the very essence that formed you, you are presented with two options: suppress your being to ease others, or remain steadfast and allow the resulting unease to reside with another. He glanced across the first row. Terrell was present beside Elijah's assistant. He offered a slight smile. The incident on that flight affected everyone. It highlighted how frequently we are instructed to be less assertive, quieter, and more accommodating. However, the reality is that one's beliefs, personal narrative, and cultural background are not liabilities. They are not something to be regretted, nor are they expendable. He touched the small wooden cross he wore and lifted it with care. My grandmother gifted me this not for its appearance, but for its enduring significance. She told me, they'll try to take your voice. Don't hand them your silence, too. A low murmur ran through the crowd. Grief, pride, recognition. He took a deep breath. I don't hate the woman from a plane. I'm not angry, but I hope she saw something that day that challenged her. And I hope we all remember, just because the world can't carry your truth doesn't mean you need to hide it. He stepped back. The congregation stood without prompting. It wasn't applause. It wasn't noise. A palpable sense of unity arose, as if a profound understanding transcended mere words. Following the service, Elijah emerged into the fresh spring air. Individuals approached him, extending handshakes, embraces, and cards. Some were visibly moved to tears. One woman gently placed her hand on his shoulder and quietly said, "You gave me permission to stop hiding." By that evening, the video had garnered 3.2 million views. Media organizations began contacting him, requesting interviews and soliciting editorials. But Elijah remained focused on his local community. His inbox remained full, yet his hand continued its work, visiting a family in the hospital, organizing food for the shelter, and completing the next week's sermon. The cross never left his neck. And for each story that arrived concerning someone standing up, speaking out, or simply choosing not to shrink, he'd whisper a quiet prayer. Not for praise, but for courage. The kind that doesn't roar, just the kind that remains. Because real change doesn't always begin with a protest or a headline. It begins with one person choosing to remain present. And if this story resonated with you, please don't simply move on, but share it, discuss it. And always remember to remain true to yourself, even when it's simpler to conform.